Hey there, alpha holes. I'm wearing my elf ears, so you know that means that we're gonna talk about Sarah J. Maas. I finished listening like a week ago to House of Flame and Shadow, the third and final installment in the Crescent City trilogy by Sarah J. Maas, a part of the Maasverse. I have a ton of videos about Sarah J. Maas. I think I go over all of Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I definitely have a video about the first Crescent City book, and then I think just no videos about the second Crescent City book because frankly, I just didn't care for it too much. But we're gonna talk about the third one. I have a lot of notes. So my general reaction, now that it's, finished. There's some open-ended story beat, so clearly I think she's planning on still maybe exploring avenues in this world, but through different characters, kind of like what she does with A Court of Silver Flame, where she explores more of that world, but through Nesta instead of Farah. I suspect she's going to do something similar with Ethan. This is her first trilogy, an adult fantasy, explicitly adult fantasy, although Court of Thorns and Roses has rebranded itself as adult fantasy instead of YA fantasy. But this was thought of, conceived of, executed from the get-go as an adult fantasy. And I've talked about this back in 2020 when I first read the first installment of this series, that there's things about this Maas Unleashed, the adult fantasy, that I don't love, where in a weird way it still feels like YA, but with just more cursing and more sex scenes. I would say the world building is a lot more in-depth than in any of her previous series. In a lot of ways, extremely convoluted, but there is a lot, and there's a ton of characters, and the fact that we're now bouncing between worlds is really interesting. The second book was definitely a bit of a lag for me. I did not like it as much, but it really came back around with this third one. I really enjoyed this third book. Once I got into it, I just really zoomed through it. I loved the ending. That took me aback by just how moved and freaked out by it I was, so we'll get into that later. But overall, I think the series, I wouldn't say it's her most consistent, but it is very fun. And I think if you're into Sarah J. Maas, then you're going to be reading this no matter what. So that's where I'm at. Let's just get into the specifics. I already touched on this. This is my favorite, the House of, Flame and Shadow. I don't love the titles. I get them confused really easily, but this third one is by far the one I like the most. She must have really taken in some feedback and constructive criticism, because to me, Court of Silver Flame, which came out very shortly after the first Crescent City, both suffered from having way too many gratuitous, lengthy sex scenes that just made the plot come to a complete and utter halt. Any character development, just all of it would just stop. And it was like every 2 to 3 chapters. And this series, the second book, I think really suffered from that. I was just desperately trying to get through them to get back to the story because nothing was happening. There wasn't like character development or anything like that. There was just lengthy, excessively graphic, like trying to one-up herself in her own book. It was just not hot or cool, just annoying. And there was not a sex scene until over halfway through the book, which I thought was just incredible restraint on her end. And then it also felt more earned because it was these characters that had been away from each other for a really long time coming back together. And then she even tried to utilize a sex scene as a plot point later on, like Hunt leaving some of his lightning power within Bryce, something like that. Yeah, but it's okay, actually fewer but more purposeful and emotionally resonant is always going to be better in my mind. I like that they're a little saucy and a little spicy, but I'm not going to them for that. I genuinely like the characters and the world. I was a little so about them visiting the ACOTAR world. I thought it would be more. I thought we'd get to meet more of the characters. I thought we would see Farah and Bryce interact, or Rhysand and Bryce interact more, and maybe even like Farah and Rhysand interact with like the other characters of the world. Now, if she, as in Sarah J Maas, plays around with this idea of intertwining worlds in future books, I can forgive that. But you know, it really was just Bryce, Nesta, and Azriel. And Azriel just proves himself to be the most useless character ever. Because this guy, and I have affection for him because I love ACOTAR, but like, goddamn, he sucks at his job. He can never do anything right. He's always described as like being so dangerous. And it's just in his shadows, he's just exuding danger, but then cannot stop a bad thing from happening, cannot save anybody, can just truly not do anything right. Where like Nesta, at least, I don't know, does things. She can negotiate. She like seems to track what Bryce is gonna do before it happens. You also have Nesta, who's kind of a subdued character, and Azriel, who's an extremely subdued character. He's like barely a character, if we're being completely honest, interacting with Bryce. And while I liked Nesta, her and Bryce kind of having their tit for tats or whatever, I do wish that there was a more... Come here. I do wish that there was a more vibrant character, aka Rhysand, Farah, maybe even more, to interact and bounce off of Bryce, but it really was primarily Nesta, which isn't the worst. I like Nesta, even post Silver Flames, which I think is by far probably the weakest book out of anything in the Massverse. She's still a good character. I'm jumping around so much. You have to have read this book recently to follow what I'm saying, but first act, that like massive chapter upon chapter long info dump when Farah finds like basically the holographic Star Wars ghosts pop up to tell them what happened 1,000 years ago or whatever. To be honest, the first act was just not my favorite part. It wasn't horrible, but it was just, yeah, chapters upon chapters of either info dumping with holographic ghost Faye to Bryce, or Hunt and Ruin being tortured. And that's all you had to bounce back and forth between for what felt like ever. When Bryce goes back to Nesta and she like opens the portal and she's like, please, I need the mask. It would really help me. And Nesta's just like, okay, like here you go. And she's like, no, I'll leave my parents with you. You know, so that's why you can trust me. I know as the reader that Bryce has the purest of pure intentions and she's the best of the best people and morally, you know, high ground all the time. But I don't know why Nesta should trust her, especially since Bryce actively betrayed her more than once in the tunnels in the like beginning of the book, not that long ago. And I feel like that's something where like Rhysand really should have been there to like negotiate. Again, even just Rhysand being able to read minds and be like, okay, you're good. They're trying to do this thing where Rhysand, despite the fact that he can read people's minds, is like, but not without your consent. And I'm like, but what if she's just pure evil? From a different dimension, different planet. I feel like you should maybe put that aside. But she's like a trustworthy gal. That's just my 2 cents. That's just what I would do if I was Rhysand. That all being said, my criticism of Bryce and Nesta and Azriel in Act 1 has far more to do with just me wanting more. I just wanted more of them. I was so excited when Bryce was being interrogated by Rhysand and Azriel and Nesta. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the thing I was the most excited about like getting into this particular book. So if Miss Sarah J Maas, and I can't imagine that she would restrain herself from doing this. Hopefully these worlds will combine again. I thought it was so goofy and charming at the same time when Bryce explained what a cell phone was to Nesta. This is the most fan fiction-y thing I have read in a really long time, but growing up on fan fiction, I'm like so charmed. Yeah, it would just be really fun to see different worlds interact a little bit more, because Bryce didn't even really explore the Akatar world because she was on some weird island in like a prison tunnel system. So it'd be cool to actually see them interact. There could be some really fun dynamics. You got it a little bit at the end when she was picking up her parents. Bryce's parents really loved Nesta, and there was like some alpha hole tension between Hunt and Cassian. It would be really fun if she did like another novella where there was like a series of short stories, but it was with these like combined worlds. Oh, one of my biggest issues with this entire series, and I felt it the most in this particular book, is that no one actually dies. And dying, or situations where you think somebody should be dead, just doesn't mean anything, except for Danica. When Danica died and the Pack of Devils died, that was dead, dead, dead. And even then, actually kind of not really, because I think Bryce has talked to Danica in every book. She definitely did in the first one, and she did again in the third one. And then same with Ethan, got to talk to his brother in this one. So in a way, it's like they just never died at all. Like there's not that actual consequence of these people are gone and you can't talk to them again, and that can leave a lot of like open-ended questions. And then there was so many times in this book where a character would get literally their face blown off by a gun, or they would get stabbed in the chest. Lydia gets, I think she gets like shot in the heart. The one that got stabbed in the chest, that other sort of alpha-y wolf character, she gets necromanced. So in a way she's kind of dead. Seems to be some sort of more like lasting change and consequence, but still not really. She's like still a character. And then same with Lydia, and then same with what's her face that got her head blown off. Even the torture scenes, these like extensive torture scenes where they're getting like their wings cut off, his hand bit off. They should have died 1,000 times over, but they just never do. And even then it's like, okay, his hand will grow back, their wings will grow back, their skull will grow back. Like I remember Lydia, they were breaking into maybe the castle. She needed to get past this like shitty old lady, and she shoots her, and Rune's horrified because she's dead. And I'm like, I don't know why this lady is dead and no one else is dead. Or like Lahaba in the first book died for real, but there's just so many people that you would think would die in this book that don't die. This book especially just does really struggle to kill anybody off. I did not feel the anxiety of anyone dying except for that last third, or not even third, like the very, very, very last bit where Bryce and the evil intergalactic vampire demon people actually go into the black hole. That like caused me so much anxiety, a type of anxiety that I haven't felt through a book in a minute. Part of it is that I was driving at night. I personally get freaked out by space very easily. That's not a subject I love. I don't love that. Like, ugh. So her just going on and on, it like freaks me out just thinking about it. Of this like black hole they're like slowly floating into and losing air. And I was like, well, maybe. I mean, I didn't think she would actually kill Bryce, but maybe. That was the closest I came. She could go there. I mean, I guess Bryce technically dies, just goes to, you know, Sarah J. Maas heaven and gets to say goodbye to Danica and the Pack of Devils again, and says goodbye to Jessica, who randomly became a very important character. I'm utilizing characters that already existed in this world and not like creating new characters from scratch when there's already an excessive amount of characters. And the hard thing is they're all roughly the same age. Like nobody's that old or that young. Like they are in Fae years, but not in like physicality wise. And they're all like roughly the same personality. I love Sarah J. Maas, but like tell me the difference truly between Cassian, Rowan, and Hunt. Tell me the difference between Aelin, Farah, and Bryce. I guess Bryce curses more. Bryce has a little bit more modern humor to her in a way that Farrah never did. I don't know, that's something I might make another video about, because I guess those ones do have differences. But that's probably one of my biggest issues, is these characters felt the most monotonous. The way I kept track of them wasn't by the way they spoke, wasn't there like character dialogue or dialogue tags. It was like, which one's the wolf? Which one's the witch? Which one's the angel? That's like the only way I could keep them track, because otherwise, personality-wise, they were all so similar, and they're all just the best people, the goodest of the good, which is always my biggest issue with any Sarah J. Maas series. One of the reasons why Nesta, especially pre-Silver Flames, was one of the more interesting characters in any Sarah J. Maas series, because she had some real edge and have done some real, like, kind of shitty things to people and seemed more morally gray. Same with Tamlin, but everyone in Crescent City is just the most morally upright people in the world. There's this very funny obsession that this book in particular had with reiterating that these characters were going to like demolish certain hierarchies, or all hierarchies, fae hierarchies, governmental hierarchies, the angel hierarchies, and then at the same time the actions like reiterated how important these hierarchies are, like making Bryce queen of the fae, and how Bryce is like so important because she's this leader, and how Hunt is so important because they're leaders, and then even Ethan's entire arc is about taking over a certain hierarchy that like the other wolves in the pack need, like they need this leader. But verbally they're like, we're gonna get rid of the fae hierarchies because they're not nice and they're not fair. Oh, or even releasing the Queen Flame sprite from her prison because the other little flames like need her and look to her for leadership and feel bound to her. But yeah, I mean, I love Rune and Lydia getting together. Lydia's character got to do a lot, like her having these secret twin boys that she never got to see because she had to give them away when they were a year old, and everything she did for them, and her already being a double agent as the Hind was already kind of a tough pill to swallow, but then adding these kids, I was like, okay, but it was fun. It added a little bit more substance to her character. Oh, one of the funniest, this goes with like the annoying sex stuff, because there was a part, and it's really bad in some of her other books, and this was probably one of the most egregious points of this, because it's otherwise very restrained and pretty like plot focused in this third one. But there's one point where she and Rune, they're on like that Fae island, and Dex and Flynn go missing, and Rune and Lydia are like, oh, we need to find them, and they're in these tunnels, and it's like supposed to be high stakes. They're like, we don't know who took them, we don't know where we're going, we need to find them, or we need to warn Bryce and Hunt that these people like are betraying us, or blah blah blah. And then they get, and they're close together, and then suddenly Rune's just like, yeah, and the crotch of my pants tightened from looking at her, and I was like, wait, what? I thought we were like rapidly running down the halls trying to find our friends because something horrible is about to happen, and then there was just this super like horned up scene in the middle of it. That was probably one of the most egregious points. I would say the other ones at least flowed with the story better and didn't just rapidly interrupt high stakes actionable plot. Another thing that's very funny, very Sarah J. Maas-esque, is Hunt. His big emotional arc in this book was the exact same as Rasanne's in Wings and Ruin, where Rasanne loves too much, and Hunt just, he feels so much guilt. He just feels so guilty because he just loves his comrades too much, cares about them so much, so he doesn't want to go to war because he doesn't want to lose Bryce, and that's not enough for Bryce, because Bryce is like, well, you're being selfish by loving people too much. You need to love the world. You can't just love me, you have to love the world, because I, Bryce Quinlan, and I'm a saint. And as a saint, I know you should love the world more than me, Hunt. You are bad for loving me and wanting to protect me more than the entire galaxy. I don't know, it was a very silly fake fight, but it didn't last too long, so whatever. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on with Ethan too. Like, we spent a lot of time with that like wolf girl that ends up getting necromancied, and that like dragon girl in the first third of this book, and they just straight up disappear and are just unused. So I presume they'll come up later in different books. That's generally what Mass does, but it did feel like we spent a lot of time with them and then they disappeared, and then Ethan just suddenly becomes Prime. Oh, he's super powerful and he's Prime. There's just so much time spent where Ethan's like, I am the biggest piece of shit. I suck. I think life is worthless. I'm the worst person ever. I have so much guilt. I hate myself. My only characteristic is that my brother died. I have a lot of guilt and I play Sunball, the only sport in this entire world. I'm making fun and giving it a hard time. Also, tremendously enjoyed this book, and like I said, that final third like really did something to me, like gave me actual chills. I did not expect to feel like as emotionally moved as I was by not just like the visceral fear of like imagining them heading towards black holes, also just Bryce reiterating the potential of her death has to be worth something. Shanika's death, her other loved ones' deaths, like they all have to be for a higher good. It was really moving. The whole like final third inside the Asteri quarters, and then with like the Hell Army. I wish, you know what would have been really fun? If like the characters of ACOTAR also showed up. But as you can tell, I'm just very privy towards ACOTAR. I just like really like those guys, and it would have been really cool if they showed up. But there was already 10,000 characters, I guess, in Crescent City that we have to keep track of. So that's more or less what I have to say about this book and this series. I had a great time. I love Sarah J. Maas, even though I have these things that I can poke fun at. Oh, wait, stop. I have to mention, one of my favorite parts of the book was when Farrah showed up in the Autumn Court and being like forced to stay there with her dad. I was like, I was interested in that. I was like, where are you going with this, Sarah? I also was like rewatching House of the Dragon at that time. I was primed for some sort of weird, I felt like there was sexual tension. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that I felt there was sexual tension between Farrah and her dad in a way that I might have been seeing because I had my incest glasses on because of House of the Dragon, but I also felt like it was there. And it was an intriguing, not necessarily the incest, but like the premise of her showing up and being like locked in this house, and the interactions she was having with her dad I actually thought were like some of the more interesting interactions, where until the very end, like basically until he was killed off and like, oh, he was just pure evil the whole time, I was like, maybe the Autumn King's actually way more interesting than we're giving him credit for. And obviously what he did to Runes would be a hard thing to come back from, but I was very intrigued by what was going on there, and I felt like Sarah was playing around with maybe our expectations or the chance for maybe morally great characters, true morally great characters. She just loved her pure good and her pure evil, and God bless her, because I love her books. We get the occasional Tamlin, we get the occasional book one Nesta, where it's like, ooh, I don't really know what side they fall on, or they just seem like to swing in and out of the good and the bad. And the Autumn King had a little bit of that for like 5 chapters. Anyway, tell me what you think down below. Also, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'm putting up writings, I'm putting up poems. I gotta go. It's so late. I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.